Okay, today is Monday. This is our first official day of our e-learning, and the way that I'm going to structure these videos is I'm going to try to make things as close to how we did them in the classroom as possible. So we usually start by going over all of the things you see on the screen. And so let's get started. Today is Monday, March 30th, 2020. Today is an A day. Today we are working on ISN page 76 in our notebook. And our objective is today I am taking notes so that I can begin to understand a social structure called feudalism and how it developed after the fall of Rome. I know I've got it when I can submit a picture of my notes on Edsby. And your bell work was already up. It says to make sure that you have your ISN and pencil ready to go for taking notes. If you're doing this on a tablet, of course, make sure you have that ready. If you're doing this on the computer, you might want to go ahead and set up a split screen and open up whatever document you're using, whether it's OneNote or Microsoft Word or whatever. So make sure you have that. This is the great thing about video is you can pause if you are not ready, and then go grab whatever you need and come right back and hit play. As I said in my other video, my number one preference is that you are doing this in your notebook if possible, or on a sheet of regular notebook paper. And it's also great if you have some colorful pens or things to use as well. But that's optional. So however you're doing this, however you get this to me, I'm sure it will be just fine, but I'm just letting you know my preference would, of course, be that you do this by hand because when you do things by hand, when you write things out, you tend to remember it better. So, okay, your homework is that you need to submit a picture or some type of file. This can be a PDF, a JPEG, a Word document, some file showing me that you did today's notes. And you have today, Monday, and tomorrow, March 31st, to basically watch this video and submit this file on Edsby. It is due Wednesday, so I'm giving you Monday and Tuesday to accomplish this. Our essential question is, how did social structure change throughout Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire? Okay, so let's jump into our notes. Okay, so I am in my ISN, and I need you to go ahead and we're going to just add page number 76 and page number 77. If you are doing this on regular notebook paper, go ahead and number those. And if you're doing this even digitally, give it some page numbers because when we get back to the classroom, we will want to be able to print these out and put them in our notebook in the correct order. Okay, next we are going to add a title. We're going to call this Feudalism in Europe. You may remember that we left off with the fall of Rome. Rome was in disarray. It had been split into two different kingdoms, and ultimately Rome fell apart. And when a country falls apart like that, that means that the government no longer exists. There's a lack of government. And that is an important part of this, why feudalism develops. So we have a lack of a strong central government, plus we have the Viking invasions. You may remember that the Visigoths were attacking Rome when Rome was still around. Well, the Viking invasions continued. And so you had these two things working against the people living throughout Europe. You had a lack of government and Viking invasions, and this led to chaos. And so we see where we revisit the 5 C's. You remember chaos, collaboration, conflict, command, and common good. We're going to kind of see the 5 C's play out again, a little different this time, but we're going to be seeing those again. So if you've forgotten, make sure you remember that chaos is basically just complete confusion and disorder. So the fall of Rome, people were in chaos, basically. And the problem with that is that people need protection. People have to have protection. And what we're talking about is protection from your government. And I want you to think back to when we learned about the social contract. That's what we're talking about here. People need that social contract where your government protects you. So that is what leads us to the start of this new thing we're learning about called feudalism. Feudalism, like remember the show Family Feud? Feudalism, that's how you pronounce that word. I just want you to remember how to be able to say feudalism. So, what's next here? So people turned to a social structure called feudalism. Let's put that in our notes. This is what happened as a result of having a lack of government from the fall of Rome, the continued invasions from the Vikings, and people being in chaos. They needed to turn to some form of social structure to protect themselves. And this is what they did. It's called feudalism. When we're talking about a social structure, I hope you remember that usually when we make a social structure, we draw a triangle. And at the very top of that triangle is the most important person. When we learned about Egypt, the very most important person at the top of their social structure was the pharaoh. And in other civilizations, it's the king. And we're going to see that same thing play out where the most important person, the king, is at the very top of their social structure and the least important people are at the bottom. Okay. So feudalism. So what is feudalism? How does it work? Well, in feudalism, you had kings, and the kings owned all the land, and they gave large pieces of it to these people called lords. The lords are sometimes called nobles and barons and have different names. Sometimes it's the church officials. So this is just a real generalized explanation of feudalism, but it starts out with the very top person being the kings. They own all the land. They give large pieces of it to people just beneath them. And we're going to refer to those people right now as lords. Okay, so in exchange for giving that land to the lords have to do something. The lords have to then provide protection to the king. They keep the king safe from enemies. So they protect the king from enemies. And then the lords were in charge of controlling the land. They didn't necessarily own the land, but they were in charge of controlling the large piece that was given to them. And they also had to control the peasant farmers. And then the peasant farmers had something to do as well. The peasant farmers would have to give a portion of their crops to the lord. And in exchange for giving some of their crops to the lords, they ultimately got protection and safety from, enemies or people that might want to attack. And so that's how we start to see this thing called feudalism play out. So I want you to go back up to this part of your page right here and draw this little arrow in, because this part's really important. And if you are a little confused on these notes right here, my next video, which should come on Wednesday, we're gonna dig a little deeper into feudalism. But this is just kind of a quick overview of what feudalism is and how it works. And ultimately, the most important thing I want you to get here is this right here. So draw this arrow here from the word feudalism, because feudalism is a classic example of a social contract. That's very important. Let's put a box around that and add some stars. Feudalism is a classic example of social contract. And let's refresh our memory for those of us that may have forgotten, because we already know what a social contract is. But just in case you forgot, the social contract is an agreement to give up some freedom for protection. Remember that ultimately your government is there to keep you safe. And part of the social contract and your government keeping you safe is the agreement to give up some freedoms, like the ability to just run around and do whatever you want and, I don't know, harm other people. And in exchange, your government protects you and keeps you safe. Just a quick refresher on social contract there. Okay, and that finishes out our first day of notes on feudalism. Tomorrow, or not tomorrow, the next video I post on Wednesday, we will work on page 77, and we will finish talking about and explaining feudalism. And let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you on the next video.